producing. It is a Wednesday, the 21st of May. Congressman Scott DesJarlais is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Congressman, always great to have you on. So do you have an update on what is going on? House Rules Committee had a big meeting this morning. Started at 1 a.m. Tim Burchett, of course, is in that meeting. And they're trying to get Trump's big, beautiful bill to the full House. It's got to get through the House Rules Committee. Number one, do you have the latest on where this stands?
It's kind of funny. I woke up about 3 a.m. and I turned it on and they were still arguing away. And I listened to it for about an hour thinking I'd have some inside information to share with you this morning. And then turned it on again this morning. It's still on. I have it on TV now and they're still going at it. They brought in people from all the different committees. I saw the Armed Services Committee folks on there about 3 a.m. talking about what was going on in defense and the Golden Dome. And then I think now the Ag Committee's in there, and those are both committees I serve on. And so they're talking about the SNAP cuts. And so unfortunately, I don't have any breakthrough news for you, but obviously they've been going since 1 a.m. and are still going strong.
All right, Congressman, let me ask you, the main sticking points seem to be salt tax. That's number one, is one of the big sticking points. And, of course, number two, you have the Democrats screaming that Republicans want to cut Medicaid, of course. And that is, it feels like at this point, this is just, screaming that the sky is falling, right? I mean, we hear this all the time. And Speaker Mike Johnson, he's basically said what we're doing is we're gutting the waste, fraud, and abuse on Medicaid by putting in work requirements or means testing for Medicaid. And that makes sense to me. You're a medical doctor in a previous life, or you still are. What do you think about all that?
Well, I agree with the sky is falling part because, making major cuts to Medicaid would not be popular with anybody. But if there are people who are not qualified to be on Medicaid, then we need to take a look at that. So it's a process that occurs over the next 10 years, where they take a look at who's on Medicaid. And in this country, our poverty level is like 400% of your income compared to, say, other countries. And so you can make 80-some thousand and still be considered in poverty. They just keep raising the level of what poverty is. And so, the people who really struggle with health care now are ones that don't get it through their employer and have to pay for it in the open market. So there's people that are paying $25,000, $30,000 a year for health care. And then there's people who probably can afford health care through exchanges that are employees that are not doing it. But I think with Medicare, they're looking at people who are on it illegally. The work requirements, I think, focus more on the SNAP program in ag, and that's something that's amazing to me because it's universally agreed upon across all political spectrums, whether you're an independent, a Republican, or a Democrat. It's in the high 70s or 80s that able-bodied people who can work should work, and it's kind of interesting because I sat in that committee during the markup on reconciliation, and we have provisions if you're pregnant, you're not going to lose your benefits. If you're a young child, if you're disabled, if you're elderly, you're not going to lose your benefits. But yet the Democratic argument for, 12 hours was that Republicans were going to take food from pregnant women, babies, disabled people, and elderly, when really we're focusing on the able-bodied people who can work that just choose not to work. And I think there's some of that in the Medicaid too. And, that's what the country was built on. There was a time that people were embarrassed to take help from the government. They didn't want to be on food stamps. They didn't want to take welfare because they were too proud to do that. And we've become a different culture now. And so I think, Clinton made great strides in the 90s on cleaning some of that up, and we've slipped, and now we're trying to reestablish that sense of pride in being self-sufficient and using these safety net programs for what they were designed to do, be a hand up, not a handout. And so, yeah, they're definitely screaming as loud as they can that's what we're trying to cut. But, this whole process has been very convoluted. And the SALT deductions, it seems like they reached some kind of an agreement last night with states like New York and California. Frankly, I I'm not a big fan. In Tennessee, we don't have a state income tax, so we all pay our federal income tax in full. States like California and New York have very high state income taxes, and these folks want to be able to deduct what they paid to their state from their federal. Well, that's great for those states because they get 100% of the revenue from their state income tax, where we in Tennessee have to take whatever's diluted out and divide it up on the other 50 states and get what would be considered our share from that. So I'm not as sympathetic for the SALT people as maybe some.
Well, Congressman, if I may, isn't that basically red states subsidizing the tax and spend policies of blue states, especially when you look at their soft on crime, pro illegal immigration policies?
100%. And so, that part of it is frustrating. But if you're a Republican from New York, like Mike Lawler got called out quite a bit yesterday morning when Trump came to visit with us for an hour and a half or whatever. He was in our morning conference meeting. And I think Mike Lawler may want to run for governor. So if you're running for governor of New York and you haven't secured those SALT deductions for the people, that might make his life a little harder. So I think what they've done is they've raised the amount that they can deduct. It's not the full amount, but I think it's up to like $40,000 now, which to me is a pretty big chunk. And so, I would hope that they would take that. I think it's unfair to states like Tennessee, but if that's what it takes to get our swing state or purple state Republicans back on board to get this thing through, then maybe that's the cut or sacrifice I'll have to make.
Congressman Scott DesJarlais joining us here on Super Talk 99.7. Coming up, we're going to talk about raising the debt limit. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Donald Trump's Golden Dome. And I also want to find out how it went yesterday with the president. It is 7:40, coming up on 7:45. Time to check the roads on WTN.
Paragon Mills Road, there's an accident east of Valley Bridge Drive. Franklin, Lewisburg Pike is closed between Machatcher Boulevard and Stewart Street due to flooding. I'm Christy O'Brien.
Weather today, a high of 80, possible showers tonight. Right now, 64 at WTN. Congressman Scott DesJarlais. So, Congressman, I just got to ask, I'm not trying to be snarky, but is it just a pipe dream that we'll ever be able to, at least go in the right direction on paying down the national debt, tens of trillions of dollars? Because it doesn't seem like that's the direction that we're going.
It is not the direction we're going, and it's the direction we need to go. And I think that Trump's vision of how to do that makes a lot of sense. And everyone wants this to happen immediately, and we know that's just not feasible. But bringing manufacturing back to America, being less dependent on imports from other countries, getting Americans back to work, having more people pulling the wagon than sitting in it is the way to get back to that. So is it possible? Yes, but we have to be willing to stay the course. Trump has done all these tariffs that have been controversial, but so far it seems like he's winning. The market, showed a lot of uncertainty. It seems to be steadying, in fact, maybe better than where it was. Other countries are in tough shape financially, and they don't want to have to deal with these high tariffs either. So I see Trump's strategy starting to work. But if we bring manufacturing back to this country, get people back to work, get regulatory burdens out of the way, increase our energy production, become a net exporter again, do some of the things he was doing in his first term, then yes, if the country's making more money, people are doing better, the economy's better, then yes, I think it's feasible that we start nibbling away at this debt. It's going to take time, and the way the pendulum swings up here politically, that's hard to do. We need to keep these policies in place for at least 10 years to show the direction that we want it to go.
It's a multi-pronged attack, right? I mean, you're right,
right.
And you brought up a lot of the things. There's going to be income from the tariffs as well. I mean, there's a lot of different things that President Trump is trying to do, and it very much does seem like the president is playing a chess match, and I see exactly what he is trying to do. Are you concerned with the raising of the debt ceiling?
It's always a concern because it's very unpopular among us conservatives, because it just seems like, all right, my credit card's maxed, it's been maxed, but we're just going to raise the limit again, and that's irresponsible financially. But again, the mess that we've been placed into by mismanagement of the prior administrations, and I'm not going to blame it all on Biden. This goes back a long time under Obama. Trump had a big spending package, and so there's been a lot of spending going on for a long time, and we just haven't had the right accountability. But defaulting on the debt would be a bad thing. I think Trump just wants to kind of clear the deck so he can implement his policies over the next 3 or 4 years. He doesn't want that to be his problem. He wants it to be the next administration's problem. And so, of course, I have heartburn over raising the debt ceiling, but I also believe in the vision that he's laid out and the play that he's called in this big, beautiful bill. I think we need to get it across the finish line. There's things in there I certainly don't like, but there's more in there that I do like, and we have a slim majority. And he's the one that America elected, I think, with a mandate, securing the border, which he's really already done, strengthening our military. We're going to talk about the Golden Dome in a minute. I think he's the quarterback, and we've got to run the play that's called. And so I think that if we don't support the president's agenda, then we're not supporting what America asked for.
748, and I think the phrase that pays this morning with this bill is "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." I think would you say that applies here? Yeah,
we've heard that a few times. We heard the president say it yesterday, and it's never going to be perfect. That's not Washington. There's people from all factions. We have very conservative people in Tennessee, but there's other states that we have members from that don't look at it the same. So there's got to be a little compromise for this to work.
Golden Dome, I got to tell you, I'm so excited for this, Congressman Scott DesJarlais. I remember way back in 1983 talking to my dad. Now, realize back in 1983, I was a sophomore in high school, and I was left as the day is long, and I also had a lot more hair. But it was the one thing that my dad and I actually agreed on was what Ronald Reagan wanted to do with the, what they call the Star Wars missile defense system. And now here we are. That was in 83. Now here we are in 2025, and Donald Trump wants to make it happen. You're right there on the front lines. Tell me what your thought is.
Yeah, well, you're talking to the right guy, because I think I've told you I'm the subcommittee chair on the Armed Services Committee of Strategic Forces. And what I'm responsible for is nuclear modernization, missile defense, hypersonic weapons, everything space, satellites, anti-satellites, and coincidentally, Golden Dome. That falls under my committee. So I've had already multiple meetings, closed-door meetings with all the main players, the generals, and the military folks that are tasked with this. And it's really pretty exciting. Now, we were already doing a lot of this before it had a name, because there's all kinds of new threats from around the world. Russia has done things outside of the New START treaty with their Skyfall nuclear-powered cruise missiles. They've got apparently delivery systems just off the coast. There's, apparently some kind of a satellite in space that could take out low Earth orbits with a nuclear blast that, could be done. And I got to be careful, because there's a lot of classified stuff weaved in here. But China has hypersonic weapons that can, in theory, kill carriers. And so the threats are not just intercontinental ballistic missiles anymore, where we have to shoot down missiles coming from Russia or China. We've got Iran. We've got North Korea. We've got all these proxies with terroristic ideas. And so what the Golden Dome looks like in America is not going to be like the Iron Dome in Israel, because our country's so big. But you have to have better sensors in space that can detect launches of these various high-tech weapons. You got to deny their ability to communicate with their satellites. So they can have a smart hypersonic weapon that can hit a carrier, but if they can't communicate with their satellites, they can't hit it. And so we have all kinds of projects underway to defeat those technologies. And then you got to prioritize your targets. Obviously, Washington, D.C. is protected. You want to protect your large population centers. To me, it's extremely important that we protect our launch facilities. We don't have a lot of those, but access to space is key. And so you don't want to take hits to your launch pads. Your missile fields in Montana and North Dakota need to be protected. So we have all kinds of high-value targets that we need to protect first, and that involves increasing our capacity of our missile interceptors, whether it's THAAD or Patriot or new types of technology that's coming out. We've been looking at how we're doing acquisitions in military, bringing in these private companies that have, really the ability to move faster than the government because they're not restricted by risk or bureaucracy. And so we're changing the way that we acquire weapons. China does whatever the heck they want because they don't have to answer to anybody. We have a slow process that's got us into this mess. And so one of our big focuses in defense this year is how we deal with public-private partnerships. And I'm just amazed at the different companies I've met with from really all around the world that are bringing new technologies into the game that are giving us strategic advantages. And so building this Golden Dome basically is better sensors, more capacity to defeat the new threats, and then prioritizing our targets and eventually expanding it to cover as much of the country as we can. And it has a fancy name, Golden Dome, because it's Trump.
Yes, it does have a fancy name. And of course it's gold because, of course, it is Donald Trump. I did have, just as we close out, I did have an expert from the Heritage Foundation on earlier, and I did ask him the feasibility that this thing can be built within 3 years. And he said, absolutely, we can do it in 3 years because what they're going to do is, so we've got existing infrastructure and we're just going to add to that. Do you believe we can get this done, Congressman, in 3 years?
We can get a lot of it done. As I said, we're already doing a lot of it. It's just, it's more focused now. And it's about stepping up production because it requires more. There's more threats and there's more. I mean, drones are a huge threat that we're trying to deal with. We're watching what's happening in Ukraine. And it seems like a drone would be easier to shoot down than a missile because, that's a bullet hitting a bullet. But anything that's maneuverable is more difficult to hit. So you have to use things like directed energies and lasers and microwave technology and a lot of different things to handle the different threats. But yes, we're building them now. We have $25 billion in funding in our armed services markup that we just did in reconciliation. Trump's putting a price tag of about $175 billion on it. But I think it's essential that we protect the homeland. This is an idea that, as you said, Reagan had. It's long overdue. We can get a lot of things done in 3 years if we get the green light to allow the companies to bring forth the technology that I've been seeing, and a lot of it's space. If you can't win in space, you can't win on the ground. And so defeating their satellites in different orbits, whether it's low Earth orbit, but geosynchronous orbit, and some of the tougher orbits to get to, is really where I think the action is going to be at, because you have to build redundancy. We know they can take out some of ours. We know we can take out some of theirs, but you got to have more different ways to access your technology on the ground. So for the warfighter on the ground, it all starts in space. That's the new warfighting domain, and I think I like where we're headed from what I'm seeing. And so, yes, I think we can get an awful lot done in 3 years. We just we need to get the funding, and we need to get the green light to let these innovative new companies bring in their technology to get it done.
All right. As always,